Bob, do you have any questions before we get into this, or have you? I haven't been involved in your correspondence at all. So,
David said I could be drunk, high, and not wearing pants. So I think it's covered all my questions.
To be clear, I didn't request those three things.
Right. Well, okay. Fair enough. Well, you should have told me that like 15 minutes ago. Is all I.
A nudnik, a real bum.
The bad clowns freak him out.
this is the theme song of the podcast of the movie of the uncle of the nephew who's a dreamer and he can keep a job. We watch the movie by the minute and we talk about what's in it, but we want it to be different, so we added 2 more seconds. It's UHF 62.
60 second. UHF 60 second.
I know.
Welcome back to UHF 60 Second, the podcast where we talk about Weird Al Yankovic's 1989 film UHF, 62 seconds at a time. My name is Jonathan, and my name is Jonathan for this episode. I'm joined by my co-host.
I guess I'm David then.
Yes, and we have a very special guest that I'm really excited to have with us that I teased earlier in an earlier episode that I did not bother to go back and find out which episode it was. But it's already happened. It's in the past. But we have with us Bob Soulliere. Thank you for joining us, Bob.
Thank you for having me. I am excited to be a part of this very fascinating project.
We are super glad to have you, or I am anyway. We'll find out if David is later on. So we have episode 8 here. This episode begins with us hearing George's last name and ends with George making a heartfelt request for Bob to bash his head right. I don't think we get the N in this episode. So that is the portion of the film that we're talking about. Jonathan, your thoughts. I'm Jonathan. David, go.
So, Jonathan, what are your thoughts then?
Well,
Catch you off guard. First of all, I want to know, Bob, is your last name French?
It is. My ancestry is from the Canadians who crossed over in Detroit.
That's perfect, because we have this little theory that UHF, or OOF, as we might say, is possibly French. With the director J'ai la vie.
Possibly. There's certainly a conspiracy theory to be made for the French influence, I think, of the Vidiot, as Mr. Yankovic liked to call it.
Did he like to call it that?
He did. He hated UHF. If I'm, again, remembering my research correctly, it was only released as UHF in the United States, and then overseas it was something like a Vidiot with UHF kind of thrown on at the very end. But that was kind of like a compromise that the studio had made with him, because his concern was that UHF was a dying technology to begin with, and that it certainly wasn't widespread across the rest of the world. So he wanted it to be kind of something more universal, and that didn't go over so well with the fine folks from Orion Films,
the movie company that was going out of business anyway.
Yes. So that doesn't answer anybody's questions as far as the thoughts on the first 62 seconds that we were supposed to be viewing. Now this is the 62 seconds where Bob and George are at Big Edna's, correct?
Well,
yes.
It's Big Edna's Burger World.
Yes, Big Edna's Burger World. That's what it is.
It's kind of the conclusion of that portion, yeah.
And that kind of makes me think, like, so if this is Big Edna's Burger World, does that mean that Big Edna, does she have a bunch of different businesses in town? Is it like Big Edna's Lumberyard, Big Edna's Spatula City, or?
Well, we know it's not Big Edna's Spatula City because Cy Bloomgreen or something like that.
Maybe
is the owner
he
of
bought the
Spatula
company
City.
from her, though.
Well, because he liked the company so much, he did buy it. So it's possible it could have been Big Edna's Spatula City. I wouldn't discount that. But it does. It seems like a very interesting clarifier to not just call it Burger World, but rather Big Edna's Burger World.
Or maybe it used to be called Big Edna's, and then Burger World came in town, and they just bought up all the properties and stuff, and that was the compromise. Maybe that's why she's kind of got a little chip on her shoulder.
Is that like the Elias Brothers Big Boy, or which I know you like talking about the Big Boy, Jonathan, or there's also the BD's Mongolian Barbecue. Those are the only two that are coming to mind right away.
So yeah, but this is actually the first minute and the only episode that we see Big Edna.
Yeah, that's interesting. I don't know a whole lot about the actress who played the role of Big Edna, other than she was in 2 other kind of minor roles before this. But this either was the pinnacle of her career or the very end. Like that was it. After this movie, she didn't do anything else.
You had mentioned before we started that you knew a little bit about her, and I was shocked on the commentary. Weird Al says that she was a local woman, so I just assumed that this was the only thing that she'd ever done, and I did not IMDb her. So do you know anything about the other roles that she had?
No, I remember looking at this when you first asked me about this project, probably way too long ago. But it was two kind of seemingly small parts, and none of the film names kind of resonated with me. Okay. But I just found it interesting that she was the person that they chose, and that she had previous film work in her past as well. So she's like a mystery that I find fascinating from this entire film. Not that there aren't other, fascinating aspects of this movie, but she's just one of those characters that comes in, makes her presence known, chucks him out the door, and then we move on.
Yeah, it's a pretty singular. It is, for the amount of screen time that she has, she's pretty memorable. That was the thing. There are a lot of things in this movie we talked about when I was a kid in a previous episode. The jump that Weird Al does off of the platform when the rocks are crumbling when he's in the temple. That yes. I used to replicate that kind of exaggerated jump off of like a 6-inch high surface a lot. And another thing that I used to do a lot in my life was just when nobody was around even, or just whenever a Big Edna.
It's when no one's around.
It kills me the number of the line. I mean, I rewatched this movie probably 2 weeks ago again just to make sure it's fresh in my head. But I had forgotten how many of these lines I have said my entire life, especially even just go ahead and bash my head right in. The number of times I've said that in and of itself is probably terrifying.
Hopefully nobody's taking you up on that.
Nobody yet has, as far as I know.
Yet.
I just pulled up IMDb while we've been busy, chatting away on the important stuff. But apparently she was a Roman slave #1 in Norman's Awesome Experience. And then she is a stewardess #1 in Strange Invaders, also from 1983. So interesting. A, that I haven't seen either one of those films, but B, that she has a starring role, or at least a bit role in those.
She's always coming in first. I like it. No, never a #2.
And that's why she's Big Edna.
Weird Al had also mentioned on the commentary that he wanted... Oh my goodness. I forgot to write down the actress's actual name, but... Beulah Ballbreaker from Porky's, that actress who was also in Steel Magnolias and oddly was born in Lake Minnetonka, Minnesota, which I just drove through less than 48 hours ago. So that's kind of a really weird synchronicity.
Did you see her?
They didn't have the... possibly. I don't know what she looks like, so I'm going to say I did see her.
So you might have seen her, but you don't know. He's definitely wanting somebody big and burly and someone scary, and he said that instead they got this very, very nice woman.
Yeah. It would have been funnier if they had somebody smaller, like Mr. McIntosh, Noodles McIntosh. Yeah, I think if he had chosen somebody smaller in stature, the Big Edna name would have been a funnier punch, though.
I go for that.
I have a question about George is lipping or going off about Big Edna. She comes around the corner, and so we can, there's kind of a cut. We can assume that this terminated their employment. I think that's a fairly safe assumption.
It was interesting. I didn't take note of the number of jobs that they had already had that previous month. And I couldn't figure out why Bob allowed himself to perpetually be fired every time George was.
Oh, we talked about that.
Did you?
We had different opinions that, I don't know that they were really hard set opinions, just things that we assumed. So do you assume that he also went from job to job with Weird Al? Weird Al, with...
George.
I'm all lost anymore. Yes, George. Or, because we also had the theory that he was always at Burger World, but George, that he was getting the jobs for George, and that's why he was so upset about him jumping around.
It's entirely possible. He's always felt, Bob has always felt in the role of, Garth in Wayne and Garth from Wayne's World. Like, with me as always is, Bob. And so when I've, for all the years I've watched this movie, I've just always felt that Bob was always just somebody who went with George wherever he went for whatever reason. He's very much a Sancho to, George's Don Quixote. You know what I mean?
Yeah, I'd buy that. I like both those analogies. And I think I'm leaning more towards that. I can't remember what my stance was last time, but either in remaining the same or changing it to this view of their relationship.
The thing that I've always found interesting is I've never worked fast food in my entire life. Of all the jobs, I mean, I have worked janitorial, I have worked security, but in all the jobs I've had, I've never worked fast food. And so I've never kind of been in that burger frying, fry burning kind of experience. I don't know if either one of you have had, part of your previous career experience, life in the fast food lane.
Yeah. I talked about that briefly. I think it was just last episode that in high school I worked at a Burger King, and Jonathan's mother was actually my boss at that Burger King.
And
for a while.
What I didn't mention last episode was I kind of tried to avoid that, working at Burger King, but my mom, I'm not going to say she was sneaky because I don't know if she meant to do it, but this is how it turned out. So she got me a quick and easy job of just mowing the grass around Burger King, which is not very much, but, just once a week or whatever it was, a nice little easy job. And then at some point, whether it was her or somebody else, they were like, oh, well, technically, in order for you to work here and for us to pay you, you're going to have to sign these papers. And then I signed the papers, and they're like, well, now that you've signed the papers, you get to work inside. I was like, oh, no. So I worked inside.
Probably don't read your Apple's iTunes agreement either, do you?
No.
Okay.
I'm all upset that I don't own any of my stuff anymore.
So what do we think is the actual thing that got them fired? Was it because she comes into the room, as he's insulting her? Do we think that was the trigger? Because he just kind of obliterated 3 customers with mustard, or he also has ruined the batch of fries. Do you think that she was like fed up with these yahoos and she's like, I can't take it anymore. Today's the day. I'm just going to fire them. And she had just come in. What do you...
Oh, no, I'm a firm believer that we will tolerate incompetence, until we're blue in the face. But it's disrespect that'll get you fired.
Yeah, you're probably right about that.
So I think she was totally fine with their incompetence, their wastefulness, their poor customer service. But the moment you cross that line into being disrespectful, that's it.
Pathetic Tubillard. I'm pretty sure that's probably written down on some paper somewhere.
That's the last
in their
straw.
exit interview.
Right above the please return the uniforms.
Is that a policy? Or, I mean, you don't own your uniform, you're just renting your fast food uniform?
Yeah,
you're always supposed to
I don't think
turn
it's a
your
very good
uniform
one
in.
because, especially in a burger place, I mean, your clothes get greasy, on the inside and the outside. You get greasy and the other grease getting on you. So I don't necessarily want to wear a shirt that someone else was wearing before, even if they've washed it.
But I remember I had a hand-me-down shirt, and I was pretty excited after I'd been there like a month or something. I got like a brand new shirt that came like kind of wrapped in cellophane, and I was pretty stoked about that. We've got the phone number on the outside of Big Edna's Burger World, 834-2558. I was very surprised that wasn't like a 555 number. So I did a quick search. There are only 2 area codes in Tulsa, and so I dialed that number with each area code on the front. One is out of order. One went to a very bizarre voicemail retrieval system that I did not have the code for. So dead end.
And you didn't even try? You just gave up?
I'm still punching in permutations of I didn't know how many digits. So
did you try the address, the 6835?
No, I didn't try that.
I thought you were trying it right now.
Oh,
This was filmed in Tulsa, right?
Yes.
The movie? Okay.
Almost all of it.
Yeah, so as Jonathan said, the street address for this location is 6835 East 15th Street, which is now the Naughty Pig, Naughty spelled with a Knotty, Naughty Pig Barbecue Burger and Chili House.
And the building looks the same. I mean, it's had a paint job. The parking's a little different. You're not allowed to park right up next to the front wall like that. But yeah, it's pretty much the same.
You pulled it up on Google Street Map, or
oh yeah,
did you
yeah.
All right.
Also, there's a second location in this minute that I also did that, and that one's a little more sad to look at. It's boarded
indeed.
up and under construction.
Right, because half that building was all Myers stuff, right? They had Myers water systems.
Yeah, the
family water stuff.
Tulsa Pump Company. That's how Weird Al remembers it anyway. Even though it says Myers on every one of those windows, but yeah, that building.
Yeah.
That building on Google right now is all boarded up. And it looks like they are doing some construction. Looks like there's a sign that says late 2017, I think, that there's a bar coming. So maybe that bar is already there, and I don't know it. they need to update their Street View.
Yeah, and just to clarify, this is the building that Bob and George pull up to, and that building we learn is 14 West Archer Street.
And that's both their apartment and the karate studio.
Yeah, apparently. And also Meyer's pump and water system on the ground floor.
Yes.
Yeah, so where is their actual apartment? I mean, we can talk about the apartment when we actually get inside the apartment. Just looking at it from here, the front view, like, do they have to walk through the Myers to get to their apartment behind it? Or is there maybe their apartment is just free advertising?
Well, since the windows are facing the street and that's where the karate studio is, their apartment has to be on the back side, would be my guess. So perhaps there's a round the back rear entrance where there's no parking.
Yeah, actually, if you go on the Google Street View, you can see around the side of the building, and there is like a full-on garage door, like a double tall garage door around the back side of the building that I kind of was hoping was how they got into their apartment. They had to open up that huge garage door and go into their apartment. Of course, the apartment would have to be upstairs, I would think, because the karate guys are adjacent to them. So.
Oh, we will definitely talk about that too.
Now, I don't know about you, but the first time I saw them pull up in front of that building and George's car, I'd never seen anything like that in my entire life, and I was flabbergasted. And I'm like, someday I'm gonna own that car. I still haven't, but someday. I mean, there was something about that 1956 Nash Metropolitan where I'm like, that car is amazing. And of course, that was the same car that Weird Al Yankovic used in his 1999 All About the Pentiums video. I don't know if you recall that.
Yeah.
Video, but he rolls up in that same car.
I like how the scene change. We start out by looking at a 1983 Porsche 911 SC. So I like that they give us a super sportsy car that has two guys in it, but it is a compact. I think it might just be a two-seater. I don't know if that one has a back seat. So that one just moves out of the way, and then this one comes into view.
Even the transitions from the three cars that were out front of Big Edna's to the Porsche and then to the Metropolitan seemed to be a very interesting kind of juxtaposition of all those three elements. But I don't remember what the three cars were. The one on the left was red.
I believe the red one is the Ford Probe, which I distinctly remember when those cars came out, you saying you really wanted one of those.
Yeah, we ended up, my wife ended up owning a gold Ford Probe that she then proceeded to put leopard seat covers on and a leopard steering wheel cover on.
All right.
So every time I had to drive her car anywhere, which, it's a low two-door, flip-up headlights, I always felt like I should have a large hat with a feather on when I got out of the car. But yeah. But no, that was an early Ford Probe. You're right, now that you mentioned that.
So then I think that there's a Volvo, and I can't make out what the silver car on the end is. Not that it doesn't matter much. But you're right. I like the camera movement of the the camera is pulling out and establishing as the Porsche's going left to right, and then that reveals the Nash coming in right to left. It's just and so the juxtaposition of the movements and the juxtaposition of the type of car, it's pretty fun. And going back to what you were talking about, Bob, I don't remember the Nash having it just existed as an obvious thing, like obviously to me anyway. When I saw it, I didn't like, nothing jumped out about it. It was just, I don't know the word that I want, but it was it just seemed like Weird Al drives this car. Of course, he's never driven any other car. Like, this is, it didn't strike me at all, because it was, even though I'd never seen probably a Nash before, it just seemed like the right thing for Weird Al to be, or George to be in. I guess both of them.
Yeah, it's a natural part of him as much as his hair and his glasses were at the time.
Exactly.
I don't want to skip over the fact that that Bob, that you are our guest for this episode, and this is actually the minute that we learn officially for real that his friend's name is Bob. We see Bob in earlier episodes, but we did not hear his name. So lucky chance, or we planned it very well, or something. I'm not sure what happened.
Yeah, as a kid growing up with the name Bob, there were not many movies with strong male leads named Bob in it for some reason.
What about Bob?
So it was just well, again, that didn't happen. It was after '89. It was just one more of the pieces that made this movie so enduring to me, and it's surprising how fundamentally my life has been shaped by something as simple as this movie. Not to skip way ahead, but Stanley Spadowski's mop speech probably is one of the core tenets of my life. I don't say that, in all seriousness. It really is just that notion that, sometimes life is like a mob, and these floors are dirty as hell, and I'm not going to take it anymore. And there's such a truth there to that speech that comes from such a genuine place. It changed who I was, and in a way that I didn't appreciate until later in my life. I can't say that Big Edna changed my life in any fundamental way, but have you guys ever had fries that burnt? I mean, whether as a employee of the fast food or even as a customer.
How long do you think? So it's been over 20 years since I worked at that Burger King. Hopefully nobody can get me in trouble for this, but we did used to put Bic ballpoint pens in the fryers, and the ink would heat up quicker than the plastic tube would melt, and so the ink would have to get out, and it would, because it was heating up and expanding, and so it would shoot out the ball tip, and it would kind of like rocket the pen around the fryer on the surface like a speedboat. It would kind of go everywhere and hit the sides, and
while the ink is getting into the grease.
Yeah.
There is that.
My memory is that we did that at the end of the night. I closed
okay.
a lot. My memory is that we only did that kind of at the end of the night when we were, just prior to draining the grease vats and changing that over for the next day. Hopefully that's the way it went down. But
that's your story and you're sticking to it.
Yeah. As far as burning the fries, though, the fryers were on timers when I worked there anyway that were piercingly loud when they were done.
Oh, my goodness. That was horrible.
You recall that?
Yeah, I remember just standing in line, like at the front counter, and just just thinking to myself, "Get the fries, get the fries."
Yep. So I never burnt fries too badly because it just I needed to make that noise stop, and I think that was the whole point of that.
When I recall the Big Edna's Burger World logo, there is something about that smiling face over the very generic kind of Earth globe that reminded me of like Captain Planet. Was that the cartoon?
Oh yeah. Your powers combined.
Didn't have like a very similar kind of globe logo with a face on it. I don't know why that sticks in my head, but I'm like,
it had a globe. I don't recall it had a face. BJ, former guest of the show, had equated the logo to that
Tonight.
McDonald's Mac Tonight.
Yeah.
Which I don't see, but it reminds me of Globey from Pee-wee's Playhouse.
Oh yeah,
that's probably where that's coming from. Yeah,
Captain Planet has a big yellow globe, but there's no face on it.
Oh, gotcha.
He's got a face.
Well, I was just gonna.
I've got two tiny little things coming from like the beginning of the minute. I did notice that when Big Edna is carrying them out, that there is some mustard continuity. That it's not the same spray, but they at least cared enough to put mustard on the inside of the windows so that you can see it as if he had sprayed.
Indeed.
I just wanted to point that out.
The funny thing to me is that while I certainly recall him spraying the customers, but it was the slamming down of the mustard and the mustard still shooting out of the top of that stuck with me like, oh, that's going to make a mess. Like, I was fine with him spraying the customers. Like, I'm good with that. But, man, when you slam down mustard like that, don't you understand the mess that's going to make? I was impressed, though, that not to leave Big Edna's too early, but when they show up at their apartment, that there is just a tire iron crowbar just laying there on the ground next to the windows that he's able to just pick up and say, "Here, smash my head with this thing."
I never thought about that before. Do you think that this is as soon as you said that, I was like, well, they probably keep it there because that in the last month they've had the mini golf, they've had Floyd's Fish Market, they've had the Lumberyard. So, or any of the other places you've worked in the last month, or we worked in the last month. So we know that they've gotten fired from at least 5 jobs within the month. And so do you think that he keeps a crowbar right there? Do you think this is not the first time that this has played out?
Yeah. So is this just a repetition thing? Like he's always offering to bash his head in, or he's always willing to get his head bashed in?
It's possibly that they live in a pretty shady neighborhood to begin with, I think. And somebody just happened to leave the tools of their trade laying around in front of all the glass windows. Because to me, that was the thing that stood out. You're in front of all these glass windows, and there is this, crowbar just sitting there.
Yeah, you're right. I had never thought about that before. That's pretty great.
I kind of have a feeling, if it is part of the story, part of the world, I have a feeling that he parks his car in that exact same spot every time, and that crowbar may may prove to be useful in some ways. That maybe, he's got something wrong with his car that he always just used that to just kind of rig it up real quick, and or maybe that's like his brake. He just kind of jams it in between a couple things just so it doesn't roll away.
Do we think that they're possibly squatting in this building and they're using the crowbar to jimmy open the door every time they go home?
What I want to know is, what did Bob loan George $5 for that he's still holding on to this debt? And that's the only thing that's keeping him from smashing his brains in. Because here you clearly have a very unreliable friend who has either been fired a number of times within a month, or you've been fired alongside of him, but you still give him money. And that you still have the anticipation that he's actually going to pay you back someday. Maybe
they had to put a deposit down on their uniforms, and then they just got fired from the job, and they still have the uniforms that they had to pay for.
I would say that's a good guess, or either that or possibly $5 worth of Twinkies. How old do we think this debt is?
Or he gave him $5 to pay for a parking ticket, and then he spent it on Twinkies.
all of those things are possible. But to answer your question of how old we think this debt is, I had a guy that I went to college with, and I sold him a Cheeto for $1, and he thought I was joking. He's like, "Hey man, can I have a Cheeto?" I'm like, "Yeah, it'll cost you $1." So he was being flippant and handed me the $1. I still to this day have that $1 and refuse to give it back to him. So again, good friends will keep a debt around for a long time. It's part of that core, foundation of that friendship. So it could be from who knows, high school.
David, because we get this nice splash of the building and we see Cooney's Karate School, I've always had the story in the back of my head that I believe you told me. I know that you went and visited South Korea. I always remember the story you told me about how the Koreans didn't want to use Japanese in their marketing or anything.
At the time when I went to Korea, Koreans weren't overly fond of Japanese culture. Of course, karate is Japanese. Korean martial arts, or the Korean equivalent of karate, is Taekwondo. And they were very proud of Taekwondo and very proud of all things Korean. And so I had wanted to show some of my Korean friends what I knew about, or what I thought all of Asia was like growing up, and everything I knew about Asia, kind of growing up as a tween or before my teenage years, was Karate Kid 2. That's all I knew of Asia. I thought everything was like Okinawa and Karate Kid 2. And so I thought they would be amused to see what I thought they all lived like and what I thought, Asia in general was like as a child. And so I wanted them, so I started telling them, this, and none of them had ever heard of the movie. So I forced them all to go to a video store, and I spent forever trying to find the movie, and finally found, of course, because Koreans are not interested in karate. To market the movie in Korea, they had changed the name to Best Kid. So I finally found the movie, rented it, forced all of my Korean friends to watch it, and they all groaned and rolled their eyes and gave me dirty looks for the duration of the film.
Now, was it called Best Kid 2?
Yes, Best Kid 2.
So they did have the series.
Best Kid II. Let's get back into that Metropolitan Nash, though, a little bit.
I don't know if we can all fit in there.
Yeah, that was going to be my assertion. I'm not sure that I could get myself into a 56 Nash. And for a car that was $1,500 at the time, man, that is quite the ride, though.
Yeah. Speaking of not being able to get into it, I have here that it actually had a shorter wheelbase than the VW Bug, which is pretty astounding. Also, the color, I saw a list of all the different colors that you could get this car in. None of them seemed to ring true to the color of the car that we see. So I don't know if this car was repainted. The closest color that I saw that fit what this car is was called Autumn Yellow, but that didn't really quite seem to jive. So I'm not sure if this is a repainted or if this was a color that you could get out of the box at the showroom floor. But 0 to 60 in 22 seconds and approximately 32 miles to the gallon for the Nash. So,
equipped with a map light, electric wipers, and Continental spare tire.
I want one. Bob, have you actually tried to track one down?
I have. I've seen a number of them at different car shows, mostly because my dad was a huge car guy. I myself was not, but there was just always something about this car that I just found so endearing. But I've never seen anything that color. As far as I recall, it was a Series 3. And like you said, it didn't come in that shade. So I have to imagine that it was a custom refurbished car. But no, I can't imagine what they go for now. Probably less than I think.
I'm going to continue on with the squatter idea, and I'm going to say that these guys like repainted it as camouflage for the building.
Yeah, I'll go along with that.
That also was painted for one of their previous jobs.
The lumberyard, maybe? It looks very woody.
It does.
I have one thing here. I realized going back to names and what we were talking about earlier, learning that George's buddy's name was Bob. I just want to clean this up. We get George's last name for the first time in this minute too, which is Newman, which is a nod to Alfred E. Newman of Mad Magazine fame. I didn't want to. I'm sure somebody would have called us out on that if we hadn't, mentioned that.
No, I think that's a good point. Because it's so important that George has a last name. It's what makes him a real character.
Yeah, there are actually not too many real characters in this movie. Or, well, I don't know. I guess we'll have to wait and see what we think as we go through it.
Oh, yeah, I don't want to ruin the surprise, but...
Actually, I think as we move forward, I think a lot of the characters get full names. Like, that's, Stanley Spadowski, like, everybody kind of has the musical intro name. Not musical, but I mean, like, the name kind of rings together. When you hear, like, someone's first and last name all
Lyrical.
the time, and then, like, a celebrity or something, and then you hear just their first name, and you're like, oh, I don't, just calling Steve Martin Steve. Like, I don't get it.
Yeah, even just scrolling through the list, though, it's amazing the number of characters who don't have last names as compared to the ones who do. Because you've got Cooney, who you guys will talk about in the next minute, and then Noodles McIntosh. So, yeah, the characters that they choose to have names and don't have names, like Philo, he only has one name in the movie, doesn't he?
Yeah, and spoilers, I mean, Philo saves the day, and he only gets the one name.
Oh, I didn't reveal that part. I just really...
Well, no, that's on me. It's on me. Bob, let me ask you this. If you want to talk about the movie, as a whole, which we all love to do, can you talk about your first time seeing it or how you came to see it? Your first impressions of it?
I grew up in a very small town in northern Michigan. In fact, I was talking about it today in one of my team meetings, because somebody asked, do you remember when Kalkaska got the second street light? And I'm like, well, no, I remember the first time we got a Burger King. So it's funny that you guys bring that up. So there weren't a lot of options. We had to travel to another town to the west to kind of go see any movies. So I think the first time I watched this was on video. I remember I got my dad used to volunteer at the PBS channel there in town. It's one of the many things that he did. And we always went to the video store. And I ended up getting the movie poster first for the release of UHF coming out on VHS tape.
Sorry, you got the movie poster from the out of the window of the movie store? Oh,
yeah,
nice.
Because they had a bunch of extra ones. I knew it was before I went to, because I didn't go to college until '92, so it happened sometime between '89 and I think 90, 91, somewhere in there, where I was first really exposed to it. And I had watched this movie, and at first, it seems like this kind of just conglomeration of sketch comedy put together, just making fun of all the movies that I'd watched kind of growing up. But it really was the Michael Richards character of Stanley Spadowski that just spoke to me in a way that was so meaningful, to have this character who was so genuine. And I hadn't seen a lot of movies that had genuine characters, because again, I'm a young guy. I didn't have a fully developed movie taste, so I got to watch all the stuff that my dad did. So it was a lot of movies like Rambo and anything with kind of violence and blowing up. So I didn't necessarily get a lot of movies that were deep the way my sons have had the benefit of my passing that on to them. So to see a character like that was so genuine, that was so innocent, that his primary concern, like, yes, I'm glad I did really well in this television show, but I don't want to give up my passion, which is being a janitor and mopping. And there was something so honest about that it really has kind of changed the way that I saw the world. And that reminder to myself that it didn't matter how far my career advanced, that I can never get beyond that point where I have a desire to serve. And so even though, I mentioned that I'd never been in fast food, I really did. The first job I had in college was a janitor. So when the building would close at night, I'd change the urinal cakes. I'd, do all that business. And it doesn't matter, how fancy my title gets as I get older. that's really where I started. That is my roots, kind of that nature of service, and I never wanted to lose that thought, and it was planted, by this movie. And even just the resolution of the film, the fact that this arrogant, rich, uptight, man passes along, here, let me give you this pittance, this penny, and it's this, insulting gift that I gave you that ends up, changing the world. So just even the whole nature of those transactions, because when the guy shows up in the first place asking George for change, he pulls out, here's his wad of change, and he takes out exact change for $1, and just realizing that the assumption that I made that he was begging for money as opposed to actually just asking for change because of the way he looked was something else that really kind of just stuck with me. As something of being of benefit of reminding myself from as I went out through the rest of my adult life. And I think if I'd watched that movie at any other part of my life, other than when you're at that, 16, 17, 18 years old, when you're getting ready to go out and be an adult, I don't know that it would have been so foundational for me, but it really did, lend itself to then, later on when I'm in college, and I'm watching, Man of La Mancha with Peter O'Toole, and those kind of just themes were just echoing in different ways. And it really is interesting that it came from a movie like this for me.
That's super. I was just going to ask you, because I know you've kind of had like a lifelong love affair with Don Quixote. So, when you were talking about Stanley Spadowski, I was kind of wondering and wanted to ask you which came first, which character did you notice first, or if you were aware of Don Quixote, did you correlate Stanley Spadowski as a Don Quixote figure? And also, I was talking about spoiler alerts, but you just you really let the cat out of the bag with that.
Right. If you haven't seen it by now, I mean, I won't ruin it. That Darth Vader is Luke's father too, but that's just the way it goes. But for me, Stanley Spadowski came first before Don Quixote and Sancho. That didn't happen for me until, like I said, a year or two later when I was finally in my freshman year of college. When you find that truth, then it's easier to find in kind of in other venues and other vehicles. And so Stanley Spadowski came first.
Now, kind of piggybacking off of your experiences with first seeing this and discovering this movie, which I thank you very much for sharing. Do you recall exposing me to this film?
Now, when you use the word like expose, it always makes me uncomfortable. So perhaps we can kind of use a different word when you're talking about underage, young people. I have been an evangelist or a missionary at heart my entire life. When I find a good thing, when I find truth, of taking that and sharing and burdening others with the same thing. When I saw that for the first time, I'm like, I can't help but share this movie with anybody that I care about. And you and your brother both happen to be two people in my proximity that I cared about. I'm like, you will understand and appreciate the truth that this movie is. Yes, you will laugh, and yes, it'll be a good time. But man, there is truth here in this vehicle, and you can see it too.
Well, there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. I promised earlier on that I would have a guest on and talk about my first exposure to
right.
Talk about my first exposure to this film. And it was Bob that showed this movie to me.
Yeah, and I can't remember like where we watched it.
We watched it at my house. You were.
I thought we had.
Yeah, you. Even though you're only a handful of years younger than I am, and barely older than my brother, I think.
Yeah.
You were.
Who had a birthday? Like what? Yesterday or the day before?
Today. Happy birthday, Jeremiah.
There you
go. Yeah. You were tasked with spoiler alert. He's older than I am. Yeah, you had been contracted to babysit us, quote unquote, babysit us or watch over us for the evening, and so we watched it. We went to Premiere Video and rented it and watched it at our place.
Oh my gosh, I forgot that's what it was. It was Premiere Video, wasn't it?
Oh yeah,
sure was.
Oh, wow.
And also I want to take this opportunity to thank you, because when you do find something worthwhile, you also introduced me to Paul Thomas Anderson, who is still one of my absolute all-time favorite filmmakers. So thank you for that as well.
Well, and you've done the same thing as well. You for a while there, and not that anybody who's listening necessarily this is overly important to them, but you went through this phase where you watched a lot of really dark kind of off the radar movies. and just your openness and sharing with those things, I think is good for any of us. When we keep the things that we find fascinating or that touch us in a very important way to ourselves, we rob those around us of that same joy and impact that they've given to us. If nothing else, it's a flashlight into who we are underneath that kind of just shares kind of that very special gift with others. And so the fact that I identify with UHF should tell anybody who's listening right now a lot more about me than I probably should be sharing.
Well, I have no further notes. Jonathan or Bob, do you guys have anything else you'd like to add about this particular minute or UHF in general?
What I find interesting, that this clip, of course, starts with George lamenting the fact that nobody sees him as a guy with imagination, that they don't recognize and appreciate that as a trait that he has. And I think that's interesting that he kind of gets into the middle of that didactic conversation working inside a fast food restaurant, because it's such a reflection of not only the culture at the time, but even where we are today, the things that we put value on. And the things that we look for in a worker or even in the working class, and that we can't find places for people with imagination, and that they struggle to find ways always to be considered productive members of our society. And I think that this whole movie is such an interesting kind of carrying out of that idea. Not only George being able to run the UHF station, but even again Stanley, who becomes then that star of Stanley Spadowski's Playhouse, and how that changes. And so when you find these people who seem like hexagonal pegs in a very round world, and they find that area in which they truly fit, it changes. And so it's such a reminder for us to see people for who they are and where they're at now, and not what we want to kind of force them to be.
Well said.
Wonderful.
We'll just go back to burnt fries and gray burgers.
Mustard sprays.
Yes.
You used to play bass for Mustard Sprays.
Fair enough. Well, Jonathan and David, whichever roles you're playing tonight, thank you so much for the opportunity to be here and to share my thoughts on the 62 seconds of UHF.
You know what? I'm just going to let David Jonathan be both roles, and I'll just get out of here.
Jonathan wasn't your middle name, was it, David?
No, unfortunately.
All right, we'll have to take that up with your parents, I suppose.